Well, do you mind getting me another one?
I mind.
I'm gonna finish this teacup like 5 minutes into the show.
You're a teacup.
Watch, the other guy is gonna have one. It's like podcasting 101.
Just pace yourself.
You got to nurse that water glass. It's got to last the whole meeting, man. Unless you got a double, that'd be the other thing to do. You
I
bring
know. I have a double.
you got a double.
Yeah.
I don't sense any Boston accent when we're talking so far. So maybe I'm just missing something there, but you got a bit of a Ben Affleck look going on. So I keep expecting to hear an accent. But yeah, CustomerGauge. I'm really excited to dive into that story today. I understand that you've built a software as a service platform that helps clients improve and monetize their customer experience. You got
Mhm.
huge clients like Anheuser-Busch, IKEA, and maybe one of the coolest things you've done recently is you guys have generated $2 million and 30,000 downloads off of a research report
Yeah.
organically. So lots of juicy stuff to jump into today. So I guess I wanted to start by how I know you, because like I feel like I'm honestly promoting LinkedIn more than not in these
It's crazy.
conversations.
Yeah.
But I just bumped in your profile, man, and I liked what you had to say. I just want to know your thoughts on LinkedIn. Are you bullish on LinkedIn? Are you finding a lot of business and traffic is coming from what you do on LinkedIn? Or are you on LinkedIn just to learn? Because for me, it's actually both.
Yeah, great question. Before I start off, I just want to say thanks for having me on. I'm a big fan of your previous episodes, so this is cool. So I appreciate
Appreciate
it,
that,
man.
man. Thank you.
Yeah, LinkedIn. So it's interesting. I made a promise to myself to be more active on the platform right when COVID hit. So I was like, I'm going to be home. I'm going to have. I used to drive in about an hour and 15 minutes one way to my work. So I had a good amount of time back in the day. So I was like, all right, how am I going to use this effectively, and how can I, really get the most out of it? So I kind of landed on LinkedIn. It's like if I post every day, I do the whole comment on 10 influencers posts and just really start to try to build my following. Um, that was the original plan. I did it for about 4 or 5 weeks and I started to see some traction. But to answer your question, I think it's good now, but I think the people that are really successful at LinkedIn have been doing it for 5 years already.
Yeah.
So there's this sense to me that like, what's the next thing? Like, all right, so Dave Gerhardt's the LinkedIn guy, right? He built his platform, he built his audience on LinkedIn. He has over 100,000 followers. Not to say you can't get there anymore, but I feel like he was running a playbook back when it wasn't the playbook, and that's why he got so big so quickly. Now everybody's running that playbook, and it's really hard to stand out. So unless you have a different playbook that's unique, kind of like a Chris Walker, he's doing something that goes against the grain. um, I think it's going to be tough to stand out. So you can do it, but I think maybe I'm doing it because I think it's good just to network and meet people like yourself. But I think maybe there'll be another thing that comes along that I jump on that hopefully early enough where you can get some traction.
I hear you. And I wanted to do that for TikTok, but I'm like, no, I'm going to sit this one out for now. I'm
Yeah,
going to wait for something else. But yeah, it's definitely about timing. It's definitely about, finding that right fit, finding your unique voice, right? A way to
yep,
stand out. And that's kind of how I want to frame this chat today, Ian. We could talk about all kinds of shit, but I want to do it from the perspective. You have agency experience building your own business. You have experience through CustomerGauge, where you're working all the time in B2B environments with
hmm,
large enterprise type clients.
yeah,
I want to cover that spectrum from the perspective of the startup, how should they think about B2B marketing? How should they think about how to find their first customer? So I'm excited to jump into that with you today.
yeah.
I
Let's do it.
guess I'll ask, like, what, broadly speaking, what do you think is the applicability between the stuff that you talk about around marketing and customer experience and brand? What's the applicability of your digital voice if we relate it to startups? Do you think that we could take all the same stuff, tweak it, copy paste it essentially, and this is also a guideline for startups? Or where is it different when you start thinking about early stage businesses?
Great question. So startups specifically, B2B startups, if I could nail it down to one thing, it should be focus. You shouldn't try to boil the ocean. You shouldn't try to do everything like social media. Like everybody thinks that like startup marketing, you create a Twitter account, you create a Facebook account, a LinkedIn account, you start posting every day. That's not going to do anything except appease your, honestly, probably CEO, because it makes you feel
Right.
good, but it's not going to do shit. So there's a lot of misconceptions when you talk to these, and this is kind of what I do. I talk to a good amount of like founders that are the technical founders that build the product, and they're kind of clueless on marketing. Not to say that I know what I'm doing, but there is some level of like we post on social and we write a blog once a week, and that should do it, right? Um, it's just not the case. So if I could nail it down, it would be you need to focus and pick maybe 2 to 3 channels max and really, really excel at those channels. So whether it be organic, whether it be paid ads, whether it be press, um, you need to kind of do multiple things at the same time. So, like for example, what I would recommend doing is writing some sort of a cornerstone piece of content initially. So that way you have something to send your prospects when you're outbound and cold. It's not just a hey, take a meeting with me. This is my product. It's like hey, check this out. Let me know what your thoughts are. Whether it be a video, whether it be a ebook, report, whatever it may be, you need to start with something that kind of like, hey, this is the market. This is our view of the market. And this is why you should care.
Yeah, and I was extra interested to have this chat because I know that you talk about, how to do a lot with a little, and that's
Yep.
essentially what you guys did building CustomerGauge. You were right up against competitors that, were being acquired for billion-dollar valuations, right? You guys
Yeah.
were dealing with those realities, so you've had to think in an agile way, and as we'll get to in a little bit, for you, it was a research report, right? For you, that was the way that you entered. And I think that right off the bat, Ian, one of the coolest things that you did that relates highly to startup companies is specifically how you figured out, you know, you figured out where that future state was and where customers were currently at. And you want to be a bridge between that gap. Can you talk a little
Yeah.
bit about that? Because I think that mentality of understanding, like, here's the pain, here's where people want to be, and we can be that juicy experience that takes them there. It seems like that is one of the coolest and most applicable thoughts I can imagine for starting a startup. You need to have that ability to fill that gap, and the more clearly you identify what that gap is,
Mhm.
and if you're able to articulate it, that's probably how you also find your first few sales anyways, right?
Yeah, and you nailed it. So I think that is also a huge piece of like, if you're going to write a report, don't just write it for clickbait and like MQLs. Like, don't just write some random, 10 reasons why type of deal or like the 6 deadliest sins. You need to have strategy behind it. You need to understand what you're trying to relate to the market and kind of what the end result in the mind of the prospect is when they read this thing. Um, Us specifically, we were deliberate about leveraging bridge positioning. Essentially, before we started the research report, we were talking to a good amount of prospects. We were talking to some of our customers, right? Um, and specifically on the prospect side, there was a lot of confusion on how to do this, what's the best practice to run a program, keep it running, get the C-level buy-in, grow through the program. We're talking B2B experience programs, by the way, guys. So feedback from customers, things like that.
Yeah, how blue ocean versus red ocean was it for you guys? Like, you provided this, this advice 2 minutes ago, how, create a central piece of content
Yep.
that you essentially use as your anchor to go out and start conversations. Makes total sense. You lead with a value, right? You see what
Yep.
happens next. Do you think that that's more or less applicable in a blue ocean versus a red ocean? Blue ocean meaning, you don't have any competitors in this
Of course.
exact angle or approach you're attacking, versus a red ocean being, I'm going to start, let's compare it to my life. I'm going to start a software service company that does mobile apps where there's 10,000 of us. Do you think it's more or less applicable to lead with this approach in a blue or red ocean, or is it the same?
Yeah, great question. So blue ocean specifically, I think you need to educate, right? Because generally, if you're doing a blue ocean strategy, there's a good amount of education that goes behind that. For example, it's not quite blue ocean, but drift conversational marketing. They created a category, right? They had kind of this existing thing. They made it their own through conversational marketing. They did a good amount of education. Same thing with Salesforce going from service to cloud, right? So they basically had to educate the market around why software is no good, and they had this whole strategy around blocking software and really saying cloud is the way to go. So I think blue ocean, you need to educate. You definitely need to differentiate why, and that's the big piece there, is like differentiate why this is different, why this is new, why this is relevant to you. Again, that it goes for any piece of content, but blue ocean specifically, people are not really going to understand it. So you need to break it down, understand why this exists, what the problems you're fixing are. Um, and then red ocean, I think it's uh, similar. I think you need to take a similar approach, but you almost need to be very, very specific. You have to show you understand the market. You have to show you understand the players and say, this is exactly who we are. So we do this well, I think. So we are a B2B experience company. We call it account experience. Our competitors, I'm not going to name them out loud because that's free pub, but our competitors are like, we do everything. We do everything. We're, all industries, all of the different types of CX strategies we cover. And we basically say, no, we are very specific to B2B. We are a niche player. We are the cat's ass for B2B. But outside of that,
I just never heard that expression before, the cat's ass. I'm going to
oh my
start using
God.
that one.
I know. I heard it from my mother-in-law. I shouldn't have said it out loud. I apologize to anybody listening. That's the upstate New Yorker in me. That's why there's no Boston accent, by the way, too. I'm not from Boston.
There we
Um,
go. There we go. Oh, I hear Boston is a really good startup community, a really good entrepreneurship,
Right.
innovation community, one of the coolest places to be. So I'm sort of envious that you're getting to hang out there, and now I'll have someone's couch to crash on too.
Yeah, you got it, man.
That's very cool.
Time
Yeah,
to-
it seems like if you look at a red ocean compared to a blue ocean, you're still wanting to come at it from the approach that you're communicating that there's a problem that you are solving that
uh-huh.
is unique, right? I
Yep.
guess that messaging might be a little bit more educational of what the big problem is in a blue
Yep.
ocean, but in a red ocean, it might be a little bit more specifically, yeah, there's this general thing happening. These
Yep.
companies are doing this.
Mhm.
Here's, you know, they're not doing anything wrong. They're great companies, but here's the gap in that experience. Here's the gap in that delivery. And here's the unique thing we're solving. And maybe not everyone will agree with that message, but that's where I think companies need to have a backbone and say, like, we believe in this. And even if
Yeah.
not everybody agrees, at least some people will, right?
The right people. So I actually think it's even more powerful to say, you know what, we're not for you. This isn't for you because you're this.
Mm,
That freaks people out. It's almost like a Sandler methodology from the sales side, where you basically, you know what, maybe this isn't for you. Probably, we're probably not a good fit for you. We should maybe move on. That drives people nuts. They always want what they can't have. So there is a little bit of that psychology going on behind kind of just niching out, as like we're not going to go after the shiny logos like Apple and Samsung. We're B2B, like we do B2B companies. And that's
yeah.
really where so.
Yeah, totally. So we've mentioned target customers. I think we've used the acronym ICP a few times during this chat already.
Yep.
ICP, ideal customer profile. I love it. As soon as anybody that says ICP, you immediately sound cooler. So even
Yeah,
if they don't
ICP, you
understand
got
you,
me.
yeah, like I'm starting to use EA as early adopter. I want to be one that, like, I want to be all about the EAs and have
Could
people
be
have to
you.
check
Yeah,
that out.
craft it.
Yeah, it's going to be my thing, my shtick. But like from a startup's perspective, how do you think that startups should think about their ideal customer profile when they don't actually have sales or many sales yet? They're being asked questions like, who is your ideal customer? Who's your dream customer? They're being asked questions like, what's your customer journey like? What's your customer experience? To map all this information out when you don't know, what's that realization look like?
Great question, man. And I think this is also something people struggle with. I can speak from it from our angle, CustomerGauge specifically. So, well, goes without saying, the first person that will most likely sell the first or multiple deals is the CEO, right? So you're going to start somewhere. You're going to have probably your CEO or somebody that is like that has built the product sell it, because that's generally what happens, especially at early stage startups. You're going to work your network. But at the same time, these people aren't dumb, right? They know generally what their product is solving for a pain. And for example, ours, we solve a lot of things, but one of them, and the main thing being churn, right? So we know that there are specific industries that are B2B that have a ton of issues with churn, like telecommunications, like manufacturing. They have large accounts. If they lose one, it's a pretty big hit to their bottom line. So Anheuser-Busch, Heineken, these are our clients. We consider these guys manufacturers because they're basically beverage manufacturers, and we're actually surveying the distribution pipe. So the distributors throughout the world to keep them happy. So their logistical system is obviously functioning at top levels. Anyways, that's boring. But my point is, you're going to figure out some things through your CEO because they're going to be closing deals. But the second thing you can start doing is mapping some collateral, right? So one of the things I love to do is create a couple pages on your website that tackle specific industries or specific quote unquote ICP hypotheses. So
Right.
who do you think you're going to resonate with the best? And then honestly, let Google take care of it. Like whoever visits those pages the most, if you target certain keyword traffic, that's another really great way to slice it. Google will tell you who's generating the most traffic for this problem usually. So you can kind of reverse engineer um, who is experiencing this problem, who's searching for solutions for this problem. And then that will give you a pretty good tip to who you should focus on for an ICP if you know what your software solves for pain or problem.
Yeah, I love how you use the word hypothesis because that's really what it is, right? And
Yeah,
I don't think that means that founders should make the excuse of just saying, I don't know. Like, that's
yeah,
not good enough. But to say that I'm, I think it's this because of that, because I talked to Bob John
hmm,
and my sweet Aunt Sue, I think that this might be the problem, but I'm not sure. But
right,
here's what I'm doing to try to figure that out. And I think that
uh-huh,
when you actually come at it from that perspective, it's very non-salesy and people actually want to help you fill in those gaps too.
yeah,
So I really like coming at it from that perspective where you're really transparent. This is a hypothesis. I think this is who I want to target. And then, like you said, let data do the talking. Do you
yep.
think that LinkedIn can do this too? Like I'm really thinking lots about LinkedIn. Um, because a lot of people are not going to go to my website until I'm posting something on LinkedIn because I'm starting with traffic of 0 and I don't have an SEO score, all that kind of stuff. Do you think that you can test pains, content, messaging on LinkedIn better, worse, or complementary compared to your website?
Yeah, I think you can test concepts on LinkedIn. That's almost the cheapest channel. It's not the fastest. So let me elaborate on that a little bit. Um, LinkedIn, and that's one of the areas that I would most likely, and I know I kind of crapped on LinkedIn earlier, but I would probably have a founder start there. Because if they're building an audience on LinkedIn, in their subject matter expertise, it doesn't really end badly for anybody, right? Even if they only get a couple thousand followers, it's still a good exercise to connect with people that are in that same industry because it will eventually lead to sales. Um, and to answer your very first question, we did have a couple in pipeline sales as a result of like my posting for a couple weeks. So it does work. But I think back to it's definitely a hypothesis. And the thing that I want to stress is that it evolves. You don't really know. And we're still evolving. I'm 5 years into this job. My CEO's 10 years into this job. And we're still kind of like, maybe it's kind of this. This is kind of what we're seeing in like the pattern. Like, it changes, it evolves. And that's the point of it is that you don't get it right the first time. You don't get it right the second time. But you'll start to see patterns and you'll start to really develop a strategy once something starts to work and it will be obvious that it's working. I think it's a crappy answer, but data will tell you that it's obvious that this specific niche in this industry is really interested in what you have to say on LinkedIn. They're reading your blogs, they're answering your emails. that's just one of those things that you can't really figure out unless you test a bunch of different things.
Agreed. Agreed.
Yeah.
Is there a particular area of marketing or a particular methodology that you would say an early stage founder or startup should start with if they're, again, starting from scratch? So hopefully those first few sales come from a relationship from the founder, CEO, or some way, shape, or form around that. Whether that happens or not, is there some kind of framework that you say is the most important to figure out first? Like, is it to figure out who my ideal customer profile is? Is it to figure out the customer journey? Is it to, to collect X amount of data or to do a research report? Is there an area that you would say is probably the first thing to think about from a marketing lens?
Yeah. So when I talk to these people in these early stage startups, depends on, I guess the caveat is depends on how much money you have. So it depends on if I'm talking to somebody that is like, barely getting by, or they took a round that's, they have a couple $1,000,000 under their belt.
Right.
For the people that are just getting by, I would definitely recommend, again, focus, right? So pick a couple channels and really try to maximize those channels. So if you are making a customer experience software, let's just do that because it's easy for me. If you're making a customer experience software, you built it on your kitchen table. You have 0 customers. You're the CEO. First thing you do is hit your network, like you said. But if you're going past that, I would say you need to create, again, something that you can send to people that is saying, this is kind of what we do. It's not salesy, really. It's more about the market and maybe your view of the market, right? That's what that report was. It's basically, this is what we're seeing in the data for the market. This is how we view it. This is what we recommend you do. So I think that is a very good first piece because that feeds into a lot of different things, right? That feeds into your outbound strategy because that is another channel that you need to focus on. It. You need to outbound. It's not one or the other of inbound versus outbound. You need to start them all at the same time because and that's a big thing that comes up too is like, do I do inbound first? Do I do outbound first? It's like you need to do it all. You need to build organic search traffic. You need to go outbound. You need to post on LinkedIn. Sorry, I jumped ahead of you, but go ahead.
No, you're absolutely bang on. I just can't
Yeah.
agree with you any more than you already stated there. That's just unbelievable. Yeah, like there's nothing that replaces that direct outreach because that gets
No.
you a chance to have an actual live conversation with another human, right?
Yep.
And I honestly think that the more intimate the better, right? Ideally you would
Yeah.
sit down on a park bench with every
Yeah.
prospect
Yeah.
and you'd share half of your ham sandwich and you would be able to actually see them and talk to them and look into their eyes and see their mouth moving. Then the
Yep.
next step is do a Zoom conference, and then the next step is a phone call. So that's why I'm bothered when I see people on LinkedIn with ghost profile pictures, or they're doing Zoom
Yeah.
calls with their camera off and their excuses, oh, I don't have a webcam. It's like,
Yeah.
come on, man. Like, you're
Yeah.
killing that intimacy, and that intimacy might make the difference between somebody opening up and having that rapport where they're going to share what their actual pain is that actually
Yep.
keeps them up at night, or
Yep.
they'll just tell you like an industry secret that like they're not supposed to tell you, but their employer said blah blah blah, and it's like, holy smokes, the fact that you told me that, I could build my whole go to market strategy around that. So I'm
Yeah, man.
huge on like, how do you use things like building trust and rapport to actually fuel your marketing investigation per se?
And it's interesting you say that too, because right now I feel like we're with COVID, right? I hate to bring it up, it's the elephant in the room, but with COVID, we're moving to a deeper level of relationship, even digitally. And this sounds weird, but roll with me. So level one is almost like this. Um, how's the weather? You have these very, I don't know, I mean, anybody remembers the conversations before COVID, but it was like very generic. How's your weekend? Great. Yeah. Uh-huh. How's the weather? Great. Yeah. Oh, wow. You're in Boston. I'm in Boston. Awesome. Okay. Now you go on, it's like, oh, how are you doing? Like, how's your family? Like, I see kids in the background, and it's a deeper, instantly deeper for a lot of these meetings where you're going below that very surface level kind of relationship to something a little bit deeper because we're all in this shared experience that is honestly intense. It's intense for everybody across the board. Um, so you have this unique opportunity to connect at a deeper level and see people for who they really are during this thing. And I think that's become invaluable for I think a lot of these startups is they get to see they get to break through that wall is the only way I can describe it a lot faster.
I agree. Yeah. And I don't think it replaces that in-person
Doesn't.
experience, but like in terms of getting that touch point quickly and not having to deal with the awkwardness of like, ooh, they filled out a form on the website, but like, I don't know if they have a good enough internet connection. I don't know if
Yeah,
they have a
yeah,
camera. It's like I had that awkwardness where I was scheduling calls with prospects that were phone based as opposed to video based.
hmm,
Why? Because my first couple calls, people were scrambling to set up their accounts and to download
yeah,
software. And I was just like, shit, I'd rather just have an experience that's not stressful for anybody. But
yeah,
now it's like you can at least expect that people know what Zoom is and you can
yep,
have that touch point sooner. I still think, though, the people that are willing to jump on a plane and go halfway across the world to sit down with their customers, that
yeah.
they're going to get an edge in these early days.
Yeah, I agree, man. And that's never going out of style either, right? So it doesn't matter if it's early stage, late stage, billion-dollar company. You sit down with your customers, good
I
things tend
agree.
to happen. It's just
100%.
what it is, you know.
I'm going to share a picture right now, and these are
Do it.
things that sometimes happen in COVID that you really do get to know who a person is when they have the chance to kind of jam out with their family, right?
Yeah. Oh, there it is.
So
Yes,
I had
sir.
I had to put the left and the right here together just so anybody looking at this knows that this has to be the same man because it looks like the same house to me.
That is Bilbo Riggins. He's a old blues guy from South Louisiana. Yes. No, so that's what happens in quarantine, man. You can't predict anything. You got to do silly things to stay sane. And that's my little boy there. And we like to jam out. And I was doing a video for the company.
Well,
Also done another one where something along the lines of like I'm playing a song and like this expresses how I feel during quarantine. And it's like you start playing it and then you just scream at the top of your lungs.
that's unbelievable. Yeah, when I saw this, I just immediately clicked the subscribe button. So you got a +1 on YouTube.
Yes. It worked. Sucked you in. Oh, that's so funny, man. Yeah, I mean, that's it's so crazy this quarantine thing, but I wouldn't, and I know there's a lot of suffering out there, so I'm very careful when I say this, but I wouldn't trade the time I got with my family for anything else. I mean, it's you get a ton of you can't replicate that. I didn't expect that, and it's terrible in all of its ways outside, but getting some extra hours in with my kids every day it's been phenomenal. So
Yeah, we are in the lucky percentage of the
yes,
world that gets to say that, right? I have to say that
definitely.
my life is better now than it was pre-COVID. And
Yeah,
you can say that that's insensitive. I'm speaking from a factual perspective, because it allowed me some time and actually a necessity to do some soul searching and to
yeah,
figure out kind of where I wanted to reposition myself and my
same,
brand and all that stuff. And, again, I'm incredibly lucky to be in that spot that I could have
same.
used, a global pandemic as a time to think strategically. That's
Yeah.
such a spoiled way of thinking, but hey, that just makes me that much more focused to do whatever I do next is a way that makes the world a better place. So
But
I'll be a saint at some point.
but I think everybody's there, man. I mean, that's the thing is like everybody's reassessing what's important to them because they can't. A lot of people can't go out and eat dinners and go to movies and go to bars and stuff anymore. I mean, that's not. So you have a lot more time alone. You have a lot more time with your friends and family. You have a lot more time contemplating what your next move is. But I think brands are doing the same thing. I feel like one of the things that will happen for brands is they'll reassess kind of where they stand. Like, do they stand for an issue? Are they going to stand up for something? And I think the ones that will be successful in the next 5 years they'll have some element of that where people are going to come out of this thing and they're going to want to do business with companies that stand for something. There's no other way I can say that, and I think that's
Yep.
that's a huge part of it.
I could not agree more. So
Yeah,
one thing that we're talking a lot about here, Ian, is focus, and we're not letting the podcast focus. But that's fine. That's the point of making this not just a 20-minute show, so we can go off in random
yeah,
freaking
we'll dance
directions and
around.
have a good time. Let's dive deep. But on the topic of focus as it relates to marketing strategy, I wanted to touch a little bit more on what you said about focusing on 2 to 3 channels. I think you
Yep.
said, or even one if you find the right one, right? What would be your advice for an early stage startup to figure out what traction channels to focus on? I'm just in the process of rereading for the third time a book called Traction that is a beautiful read, talks about the 19 different traction channels where you can find customers.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking about this question from that lens. How do you choose? What would be your advice as an expert B2B customer experience marketer? How would you choose where to double down on from a traction channel perspective?
Yeah. So, and this is just from my, again, personal experience. I go cheap. So, like, I try to look at the cost benefit, especially when you're early stage and you don't have a ton of money, right? So, like, I would look at Google. So, what are the search traffic for the key terms you go after? How expensive are they? How much competition are there in each one of those key terms? And if it's like pretty low competition wise, I would say you should start there. If it's even medium and it's, you know, within the realm of possibility that you could spin up a couple pieces of content and get some of that traffic, you should start there because that costs nothing, right? It's just sweat equity. The CEO or the founder will most likely know what they're talking about in the space. So it's really just getting it down on paper. You don't have to pay anybody to do it. So really, if you're trying to minimize cost, try to figure out a way into organic search. So again, tying it to research is a great way to do that. Another thing that I can give you an example of is this is actually a pretty good story. So we're in the NPS space, Net Promoter Score. So this was started by Fred Reichheld and Satmetrics and Bain and Company about 12 or 15 years ago. They published an article in the Harvard Business Review. My founder, Adam Durrell and Camilla Schulten, created the software off their kitchen table about 11 years ago. And it was a net promoter software for a long time. And so even when I joined up, we were still a net promoter software. So we started thinking about how can we gain traction for net promoter. And one of the things we did was create this website called NPS Benchmarks. It was a very cheap website. We put it up and just started collecting scores because net promoter is a score, right? And everybody, human nature, what do they do when they have a bunch of scores? They want to compare their own score. It's like a test, right? Everybody wants to know how everybody else is doing or did. So we built this site, npsbenchmarks.com, started filling it with NPS scores from various companies, started putting news clippets in there. We started putting all of this stuff, industry information, and it got a ton of traction to the point where if you searched Tesla NPS or Apple NPS, we were the first result in Google. And that was a very, very minimal lift on our end. We spent, I think, less than 10K to get the website up. And it looked really good. But I guess the point is we took something that was in our industry and figured out the cheapest possible way to generate traffic from it. And that site drove a ton of business for us. It's tied to almost every one of the wins we had about 3 years ago. Someone visited that site, came to figure out that CustomerGauge runs the site, looked into what we do, figured out we have a software, and then they would obviously come and knock on our door. But my point being in saying this whole thing is that we found something that was generating a ton of traffic. We knew NPS generated a ton of traffic. We knew that people were looking for NPS of companies because they wanted to compare themselves. We knew they were looking for the NPS of the industries they're in because they wanted to compare themselves. Coincidentally, we launched the site, which then launched the benchmark report, right? So we figured out this benchmark thing is what people are looking for. So we spent a ton of cycles into developing that. And again, it was pretty organic. The report was pretty much low cost. The site cost less than 10K, but it was honestly, you could have done it for like 2, I think, if it was very, very quick. But so we figured out what people were searching for and just developed collateral around that. It was so successful on the benchmark side, npsbenchmarks.com, that Bain & Company, the originator of the Net Promoter trademark, politely suggested we stop doing it because it was potentially violating a trademark that they owned. After a year back and forth with them, we actually decided to give them the URL, and we had to move the site to customergauge.com/benchmarks. But that was a big growth lever for us for the first couple of years of my tenure here.
And you did that organically?
Yep. Didn't put any
Wow.
PPC behind it. It was all just on-page SEO around a term that we knew generated a ton of traffic. And we teed up, for example, if you visited, we had a lot of really good fly traps in there, right? So if you visited Apple NPS, and you can still do it at customergauge.com/benchmarks, but you can search Apple, and then they would show the score. It would show a snippet of the company, like a little summary. And then below that, you'd find 3 articles about Apple's NPS that we wrote. And then they would offer a ebook that featured Apple. And so you would literally just get people going to your website from NPS benchmarks, learning about Net Promoter and kind of diving deeper and deeper and deeper, just dragging people from this awareness to, yeah, there you go. There she blows.
Unbelievable. So you're basically proving the point right now that you don't necessarily need to think that SEO is a long game if you find the right angle.
That's right. Yep. And also on marketingstrategy.com, right? So my other site that I run personally, it's my passion project. I just had a comment the other day about it. Top 5 articles on that site generate 98% of the traffic, and I have over 100 articles on the site. And it's like, if you just write 5 good articles that you know are going to be super deep and help people, your SEO will pick up, guarantee it.
Okay, so let me ask the obvious dumb guy question.
Sure.
How do you decide what those 5 articles are?
Great question. Look at your search traffic, right? So you're, again, Google, if you're in customer experience, you know that Net Promoter is your top search term based off of search traffic. So I would write maybe like a deep dive into NPS, or we have a book that's called the Advanced NPS, or Advanced Secrets That Nobody Talks About, or Advanced NPS Secrets Nobody Talks About. That was way back. That was a long time ago. We've since changed our strategy from NPS to account experience. But back then, that's how we got a lot of our initial traction, is taking maybe the top 5 key terms in your space that you know are generating a ton of traffic, and going deep, deep, deep on them and answering every possible question you can think of.
And you're just suggesting that at that point you're offering so much value for your target eyeballs that
Yep.
they're going to check it out, hang out,
Yep.
send that link to other people, share it with their team,
Mhm.
just to the point where it's organically going to leapfrog up the SEO ladder.
Yep.
Wow.
So the other thing you can do is LinkedIn, right? Same thing. You can test. It's the same concept on LinkedIn. Is like you're adding value. You're giving value to your audience's eyeballs that you hope are your ICP, but you'll find out pretty darn quick if they're not. But the other thing you can do is Facebook ads. So this is, I mentioned way earlier in the talk about LinkedIn is the cheapest way to kind of figure out who your ICP is, but I would say Facebook is your fastest way. For give you an example, you can pay $20 to $30 depending on your industry per lead on Facebook, but you can serve it to thousands and thousands of eyeballs, impressions, at a very cheap cost. And what you can do is you can actually test out, especially with content, right? You can test out headlines on Facebook faster and more significantly than any other place that I've experienced. So if you're writing an ebook for NPS, you can test out 5 ebook headlines, drag them to a page that offers a 1-pager, and you can figure out real fast what headline is dragging the most people in.
Yeah, it seems like a great way to just test content for anything. Like if you were to build a lead magnet,
Yep.
use the same hook for your lead magnet that you used in your most viral post on
Yep.
LinkedIn on the same topic, right?
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah, and that's the cool thing. And then, you can go one step further. The thing that I like about LinkedIn is all of a sudden you start commenting on stuff and you leave thoughtful comments, not just, yeah, you rock, or thanks,
Mm-hmm.
or just hammer that like button. And then
Yeah.
all of a sudden it's like, holy smokes, I got 25 likes, a disproportionate amount compared to
Mm-hmm.
other posts.
Mm-hmm.
It's like that resonated with people. Copy paste, structure it, do that as your own message. And then if that goes big, viral, whatever, do
Yeah.
it as a video, do it
Yep.
as an intro to a lead magnet, do it
Yeah.
on the first page fold on your website, right? I guess it's not rocket science when you start to look at these channels as more of a playground and not necessarily just
Yeah.
the be all end all place that you put things to die. It's pretty
Yeah.
organic.
Yeah, and I think that's dead on, man. I've done that personally, where I've had a comment blow up and I made a post about it, and then I made a blog article, I made a video. It works really well with kind of exactly what you're saying. It tells you what's resonating. There's no other way to say it. It tells you what's resonating with your audience, and that's generally a good thing. If you get engagement on something, it generally means that people are connecting with it, which is going to result in good things for you.
Totally.
Yeah, and there's so many different ways you can go down with this stuff. I love it because there's never one answer, and I want to put that caveat out there. Depends on what company you are at, what industry they're in, what do the search terms look like, what does the competition look like, how much money do you have in reserve? Like some companies, maybe it is better to go and spend $100,000 on Facebook ads. Maybe that's where you grow faster. I don't think that's a long-term strategy, but if you need deals in quickly and you have the sales team that can support that, that might be the best thing for you.
Yeah.
It just depends, and I think that's the tough part about this type of stuff is you really need to understand at a deep level what you're trying to accomplish and what's important. Like some companies want 2 leads that convert at 90%, and some companies want 1,000 leads that convert at 1%. Really,
Yeah, I like that a lot. And it makes me think about how really everything depends. Everything is a hypothesis. I don't mean to get super philosophical, but I think everything is from the perspective of risk reward. Like if you have 100 million bucks in the bank account, then skip half of the stuff that we're saying and just
yep,
throw money at it and see what works. You
yep,
might be doing things more inefficiently, but you're going to get through your R&D faster. You're going to figure out what works sooner. Like if you have money to burn, burn. But you still need to figure out the same things. But again, from a risk reward perspective, a startup can't afford to spend 6 months worth of effort to do one thing that is completely and fundamentally wrong. So they
yep.
need to go and talk to their customers. I don't think any company should not talk to their customers, but if you have a hunch and you have a budget, build something, right? If
Yeah.
you have a high risk tolerance, why not? Because your time might be worth more money to, you know, to actually just go and build something as opposed to going through the other stages. But most of us are not in that situation, especially those that would be tuning into this kind of podcast. You're still trying to figure things out. You're bootstrapping, you're working lean and mean. And if you want to do that, you should know what you build before you build it. Go out and talk to people, A/B test. If you have $1,000 budget, spend $1,000 on 3 different, traction channels and see
Mhm.
what works. If you don't have $1,000, it's just going to take longer, right?
Yeah, and I think my approach in marketing is I like to fail fast. So if you fail fast, and I know that's cliche, but if you fail fast, you're not going to spend a ton of cycles working on something that won't work. Like if you
Yeah.
fail, you're gonna figure it out faster. And the worst case scenario is like you build out an entire campaign for 3 months around something that you could have figured out which was going to fail by running a Facebook ad for a week. Like that is the fear that I think I always have is like, am I doing the right thing? So Facebook is a good way to figure out where to spend your time. And it might seem like a cost up front, which you're right. It's probably an efficient way to do it, but it will tell you what will resonate with your audience.
You're saying even if your target market is, the mid-market and large enterprise, like how do you apply that Facebook advertisement for those types of clients? If your average ticket is, you're looking at $10,000 sales,
Mhm.
$50,000 sales, whatever kind of ARR that you're looking at, that's, 5 figures plus, you're still saying that you can validate that on Facebook ads.
So not necessarily by size, but you can do it based off of the traffic on your site. So like, for example, if you have a specific piece of content that says, um, this book is only for manufacturers above 1,000 employees because it's a very complex um, book that gives you a guide through how to manage experience if you're this size of a company. So you can kind of, and I know this is very obscure, but you can create content on your website that is targeting a specific type of persona and then run lookalikes on that content on Facebook.
as
So
a actual as an actual Facebook page, not just a Facebook ad.
so I'm talking about a Facebook ad. So basically,
Okay.
if you're targeting manufacturers above 1,000 employees, you can say this is the 1,000+ employee guide for manufacturing experience excellence, or whatever it is, right? So like you somehow say that this is for specifically manufacturers, for specifically this size, and this is exactly the guide you need to make your program go from step 1 to 2. That's at the surface level what you need to do. You drive traffic to that page through search, through SEO. You can even do it through ads, but basically the idea is that you take that page and then run a lookalike audience based off of a Facebook pixel and say, serve me other people that look exactly like those people that hit the page. So the idea is exactly what you were saying before, is like you over qualify out. Like you don't say, we're for everybody, come on in. You say, no, if you're not this or that, don't even bother looking at this.
Yeah,
That's
and I
kind of,
guess you could do a few different variations of that to see where you're getting the most clicks, right? Are people
yep.
clicking when you said 1,000 plus? Are people clicking when you talk about, those that want to transform and you're using more of a soft kind of verbiage? So I guess you figure out what's getting clicks, and then you can go back and say, who the hell are these people in the first place?
Yeah. And it's not that detailed. You could probably say enterprise, you could say medium and SMB type of deal. You can literally group it into those categories, and you have a better idea for who you're trying to target, at
That's
least on the
awesome.
page. Yeah.
That's awesome. On a slightly adjacent topic to this, about thought leadership in general, we're talking about social media, and we're also talking from the perspective of a startup. Do you think every startup should be out there building their social presence, building their thought leadership, building their audience? And from what perspective would you think about that?
Yeah. So this is that double-edged sword, right? Because I think double-edged sword. I can't say that, but I think that specific people in the company should be developing their profiles. I don't think you should spend a ton of time developing the company profile. I have not found that to be super valuable. So basically, make sure it's populated with content. So anytime you write a blog or release an ebook, you put it on your social channel, but don't be the company that posts 4 times a day about themselves on LinkedIn. Just don't do that, because it's not, nobody's listening, number one, and nobody cares, number two. But I think the better solution and strategy is to pick a couple people in your company that have um, something to say about your industry and have them post at least once a day. Comment, kind of the strategy is post once a day and comment as many times as you can on relevant posts with something valuable and insightful.
Yeah, I would agree. I got a new job officially very recently with Deep Dive Technology Group. I know you sent me a congrats shout
Yeah,
out, so
man.
appreciate that,
Great.
man. I was like, holy smokes, my status update almost went viral. I got a lot of I still haven't gotten in touch with everybody. I want to go through every single one. I'm not that big that I'm not going to go and actually click the like button and
Yeah.
thanks and tag the name and add an emoji. But yeah, I was super flattered by that. But I look at what we are doing. We have a CEO and founder and visionary that really stands out like a sore thumb
Yep.
in a very positive way in a new industry. And we're a 25-year-old company, you could
Yeah.
argue, but we feel like a startup because we're doing things in a new space and technology, and we have a new piece of intellectual property. So we're still kind of figuring out who is our ICP, how do we reach them, what's the message, all that stuff from scratch. So this like startup mentality, that's where it applies to anybody. You look at CustomerGauge, like your startup experience was all around, a research report, which yes, I do want to talk about shortly. But I say this because like for us, like the thought leadership angle made complete sense to do that as opposed to focus on the corporate brand. And that was like
Yeah.
the first thing that I said. I was like, Misha, stop sharing things from the corporate page to your personal page.
Yep.
Let's do that shit in reverse.
Yep.
And let's make you the priority here. And you're going to make sure that you're going to have to tell your other business partners and, everybody else in the organization that you're not doing it because you're an egomaniac. You're doing this because it makes the whole company look good. So, and, choosing that one or two or three people that really stand out. We're trying to be LinkedIn first, and we're also trying to be CEO visionary first.
Yeah.
And so far, so good. Like, we'll have to see what happens in a number of months with this strategy, but it just feels more authentic. It feels better to create a video that doesn't have an intro and outro advertisement selling the company.
Yep.
Just post the content. It feels better turning what would be a press release into a bit more of a value added post that's actually providing a story or providing, some very specific piece of advice, really trying just to change the whole approach to value add. And engagement's going way up, profile views are going way up because that's what people want, right? And if the
Yep.
corporate page kind of sits there and is a little bit more idle, I'm okay with that. I think that corporate pages need to evolve, and the coolest thing that I've seen on LinkedIn for how to do that is make it an industry content curator.
Yeah.
Make it a voice. if
Yep.
if you're doing something new and interesting, then take what you're doing and everybody else, and then consolidate that and share that industry news on your page. So
Yeah.
people might want to follow the business page for more of a reason than just to be sold to.
Yeah.
What's your thought about all this?
I love it, man. I think that's the new way to do it, to be honest. And specifically the company page, I haven't seen a company do it properly yet, to be honest, but I completely would buy into that would be the way to do it. Especially, let me just piggyback off your CEO story there. So my CEO, when I told him I was going to be posting every day on LinkedIn about personal stuff, right? Like not CG related, not experience related even. I was taking a marketing angle.
Yeah.
He was skeptical, right? He's like, I don't get it. Seems like a lot of effort. And it's not that he's not a marketer, because he very much is. He is. I got lucky and I got a good founder that is understanding of marketing at a deep level. He used to be a marketer.
Cool.
So I got lucky there. But long story short, after 3 weeks of doing this, we were looking at nothing else changed, right? We didn't change the corporate strategy on LinkedIn. The only thing that changed was me going every day hard. And our profile, the company profile, increased in views by 4,000%. So let that sit in. So just posting on my personal profile and not really changing anything on the corporate side, the corporate views went up 4,000%. So there is absolutely something to what you said, where it's like, don't do the corporate stuff. Make sure it doesn't look desolate, have some things there, but that's not where you spend your effort. You spend it on the personal development of the brand, because not only that, you're making connections. Like I've sent multiple people to sales after people have reached out to me and said, hey, I would love to learn more about this. And I'm not pressing them for that, right? Like the other big secret on LinkedIn is never sell. Like don't ever sell your product, don't ever sell your service. Add value. That's literally your only job, is to add value.
You did that 4,000% increase in page views, you said, to your corporate site. How many times did you actually clearly say, hey guys, go check out this page?
0.
Zilch.
Yep. It's
Wow.
crazy, right? So
Yeah.
counterintuitive.
And do you think that number of page views would be substantially lower if you did specifically tell people to go? Do you think it would be more or less or the same? Do you think you would
Oof.
lose some audience? What do you think would happen?
It's a good question, man. I think it's more compelling when you don't. I don't know how else to say that. I think it's more compelling when you get somebody so interested enough in what you're saying that, like, who is this person? Like, where do they work? Like, what is going? I mean, that happens to Gong all the time, right? Like, the people at Gong are crushing it. Like every time I see an interesting post, like the CMO posted a video of him playing like a Beethoven piece on piano over the weekend, and I was like, who's this guy? Like, what the hell's going on here? And I like figured out it was the CMO of Gong, and then I went and checked out Gong. I mean, I've known about them for a while, but I did go to their corporate page again and see, like, all right, what else are they doing? That's kind of interesting. But point being, I now know who Gong is. I know what they sell. I know who works there. I know what their value add is in the market. And if I ever needed that service, they'd probably be up there on like one of the top 2 companies I'd reach out to. So
Yeah.
it
So
works.
even if you're not actually pushing people to go to your website,
Yeah.
just by being active and value added and interesting and unique on a distribution channel like LinkedIn, make sure that your website does look freaking optimized, I guess, because it won't be you making the sales message. It'll be that content that hits them in the face when they get curious enough to click, right?
Yep, that's right. So you have to populate it with a certain amount of things that are like, we have our video, right? Our explainer 1.5 minute video pins to the top of our LinkedIn profile. So that's the first thing anybody sees. So if they're like, oh, who's CustomerGauge? What do they do? Boom, explainer video, 1.5 minutes. Like, get it right away. Really
Yeah.
easy.
The thing that I'm seeing or thinking actually
Yeah.
is there's enough other people saying subscribe to my channel, DM me if you want this. Like, yes, we understand that. We get it. Like,
Yeah.
it's already ingrained in my head. So why do I need to be the one to say that? Like, can't I just be the one that's super non-salesy and human behavior understands that I want you to click anyways, but I don't really need to say it. So I'm trying to take that different approach. You mentioned Chris Walker before.
Yep.
I see his approach. Honestly, like, can I be honest for a second? I would have
Yeah.
never told anybody this, but you see the angle that my mic stand and microphone is dropping in here?
Yeah, that's the Walker angle, right?
That's the Walker angle. Yeah. Yeah. It's unbelievable that I looked at his videos and I tried to find the right angle. So I'll have to tag him in this. Chris, this is now dubbed the Walker angle.
It's the Walker angle. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we might have to pay to say that out loud now. I don't know.
Yeah, he's going to TM. I'm going to build a website and start to build traffic for it. And I'll wait until I get a cease and desist from him.
You're in good shape then.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So let's talk about your research report.
Sure.
What I understand and love is that you essentially repositioned your entire company around a 2-year-long effort to create this organically built and generated research report. I'll let you walk through a few things, but I'll just tell you what I know. I understand It's like an 80-page, big, juicy report. You might even have it there right beside you.
I should have. Yeah. Sorry.
No problem. I understand that it was 30 questions that you had on a website where people were submitting their feedback, and you were just encouraging people, I guess, whenever they went to your website, they would see this option to fill out this questionnaire. They'd fill out this questionnaire. It would spit them out a PDF that would tell them, here's what other people said, and here's our recommendations. And this is something that you did in a way that was co-branded. There was other big names that you got to also join you in this article. So it built all kinds of credibility and relationships. I kind of want to hear what I missed. And I also want to know kind of, how did you actually execute that beyond that initial summary? Like, how did you build something that had the right 30 questions? And how did you build it in such a way that it provides value for me for filling it out? Because that doesn't sound super easy to make an auto-generated thing that says, Luke, this means you should do that. So what was the behind the scenes like when you built and executed that?
Yeah, great questions, man. So, we did it two ways. So had the survey built in CustomerGauge, and we would send it out to people, right? So like we would just kick that out, no assessment tied to that. So that's just a basic. Here are the questions, answer it. That angle, we would have sales kick it out to their prospects and say, "Hey, we're doing this big survey. It's going to be really interesting. We're going to write up a big report. It's going to be co-branded with Salesforce, Microsoft, yada yada yada." And basically that was our outbound sales strategy there for a little bit. They would take the questions, we'd get all their answers, which we promised confidentiality, which we did. So we don't like advertise that outside of that specific person that took that test, but the salesperson would have it. So then they can address what they said in the report directly with that person. So that was one way we did kind of data collecting, right? So we would have, a couple hundred submissions from prospects, but we also did this with customers, right? So we'd send it out to customers and say, hey, take the survey. We were basically promising exclusivity to the report. They would get it before the general public got it. But then we did this second iteration, which was the assessment, which I think is more interesting. So same questions, but we built it into a software that basically spit out, once they answered those questions, a report that says, this is how you scored in each section. This is how other people scored in each section. And we would have basically 3 kind of dynamic responses based off of their overall section score. So there's 4 sections. So let's say section 1, they got a 50 out of 100. So that's a middle of the road response. So we would dynamically select what recommendation they would get based off of the questions they got wrong or got lower points on. So
Lower than the benchmark.
yeah, exactly. So we were saying, looks like you're struggling with closing the loop and measuring a retention rate. Well, this is what you should maybe focus on first, and this is how you measure retention rate. So it was like a very good, and what I loved about it was the reciprocity, right? So we're asking them to fill out a 35 question survey. That's a ton of information. That's a ton of time. It took on average 8 to 10 minutes for people to fill it out.
Wow.
But the promise with the assessment was, hey, we're going to give you a customized PDF that shows you how you did, shows you the benchmarks versus, so you can stack rank your results versus everybody else. Not only that, we're going to give recommendations. So that was super successful. I think we generated a good amount of responses from that. And that lived on our website. We sent it out via email. We published it on social. We kicked it out everywhere, right? So it's not just we have it and it lives on the website. We made sure to promote that because that took a lot of effort, and that is something that I will be very upfront about. That was a heavy lift on the team. It took a lot of writing, took a lot of analysis. So you ask how we actually did it. We did it with spreadsheets. We would have basically the scoring mapped out based off the questions. So if it's a 5-question multiple choice, each question is worth like 2.5 points. I mean, you had to do the math of how it would actually output the results. That was the hardest part. Figuring out what questions we wanted to answer. Luckily, we had a good partner with our then head of professional services, Jurgen Bo Christensen. He is I would say, net promoter genius. So he kind of knew what to ask. We would maybe go back and forth on a couple, but he had a pretty good idea what the framework would be. So I guess that's really, but if I could narrow it down, it's like, ask the questions that you think people are struggling with the most. And like, we found out also that 40% of companies don't know their retention rate, right? So like, that means that you don't have a good understanding of your customer base. You don't even know, 40% of them, like what the retention rate is for 40% of the companies out there. I mean, that's crazy. So
Wow.
yeah,
Were the questions mostly like yes or no, or, from 1 to 5, focused on the pain specifically? Like it sounds like it was a lot very quantifiable as opposed to qualitative questions. It was, 1 through 10, yes or no, up or down. And it seems like it was very pain focused, problem focused, because then
Yep.
you would be able to say, okay, those that have this problem, here is our suggested answer. So not only is here's what other people, here's what their level, the average level is, but you had prepped a whole thing of content behind the scenes, which basically it seems like you had an ebook that you split up into parts where it's like, if you have this problem, I'm going to give you this juicy, how to solve this. If you have this problem, I'm going to give you this. If this isn't a problem up here, then I'm just not going to give it to you. Does that
Yep.
sound like what happened?
Pretty much, yeah. So we had it was a good mix of qualitative and quantitative. I
Okay.
think it was probably a little bit more quantitative, to your point, like measuring what's actually going on. We asked for like the retention rate, we asked for their net promoter score, we asked for a lot of numbers, right? So then pair that with the actual program side of like, how's your program set up? Like, does your company have a dedicated CX team? Yes, but it's one person. No, but we have a temporary resource, or no, there is no dedicated experience program. So it run the gamut of yes, 100% dedicated, to kind of like somewhat dedicated, to like maybe not really, to not at all. So what we did is we paired the qualitative and the quantitative and kind of meshed those two worlds together with analysis to say, all right, companies that are, having a dedicated program generally know their retention rate better, or have a better understanding of their growth rate as a result of their program. So it's like you can make those kind of connections, and that's really where the value lies, is connecting the qualitative and the quantitative worlds. We found.
Yeah, it's another thing that's beautiful about this whole thing, Ian, is even if you asked someone to do it and they said no, or they were too busy or whatever, you didn't have to take huge offense to it, because
Nope.
it built up awareness anyways, because then you can come back to these same people, 6 months later, and it's like, hey, that cool touch point that I had with you, or I promoted this crazy shit that we're doing, here it is. And they can be the lazy, non-participative person, they still get the report, right?
You got it, man. And we did an even cooler thing too, which I don't think anybody can do anymore because it was a physical event. But we invited people to come see the results live in an event in Boston or like Amsterdam twice, in Australia and Silicon Valley. We did like almost like a world tour of physical events where we took the research we did and we got the companies that partnered with us up on stage, like Salesforce, Microsoft, not Vodafone, but a couple other companies that I'm just blanking on. But they basically showed up and they would give their spiel. We would give our spiel. We'd get Gardner or Forrester at the events as well to back up the kind of the CX side of it. But you're right, man. There is something along the lines of like, hey, remember that thing I asked you to do that you didn't do? That's totally cool. But I have this thing now that you're going to want to see. It's what actually we produced from the survey data. Or, you know what? And if that's not your bag, come see us in person. It's a day long event. We're going to have a ton of knowledge dropping in Boston that, whatever date. So it's a really good outbound prospecting tool, regardless of what stage you're at in the
Sure.
actual process.
And that's a huge thing for early stage startups too, is
Yes.
to say shit and then do shit to be able to, show that you're making progress, right? It's what investors want to see. It's what
Yep.
customers want to see, because most customers don't want to buy, the first iPhone, but then all of a sudden iPhone 2, 3, 4 comes out and I'm looking at my shitty BlackBerry saying, I can't do that. So, you see the progress that a brand, that a company is making, and when they make promises and they deliver, there's trust built up, and
Yep.
it's just that extra touch point that you have, right?
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, it's so powerful, man. I can't uh, overstate that. If
Yeah.
you combine all of those things together into a cohesive strategy, right? It's like they say multi-channel marketing, but that's really what it is. You're literally tackling it from all angles. You're getting all of your marketing dollars, your sales cycles behind this one thing, whether it be getting people to attend the event or downloading the report or whatever it is. Then you can really, especially for startups, I think the hardest part is like translating the message that the CEO is using to sell to all of the new salespeople. So like giving them one playbook that they can really hone in on and works, and just saying, hey, when this comes in, this is what you do. I think that's invaluable because you don't want a salesperson saying 50 different things to prospects. I mean, great if they need to figure out what works, but if you have a good idea for what kind of already works, then you can just replicate it. I mean, having a startup really get behind that one thing for 6-12 months is super super impactful because the reps just get really good at it. And yeah.
Yeah, focus, right?
Yep.
From an industry insider or outsider perspective, that's the one thing that's coming to mind in terms of, you guys were industry insiders, you had deep domain experience, so you're able to build that diagnostic tool that said, well, if these are your problems, we know that this and this lead to that problem, and we know that this and that is the best solution. If you don't come from deep domain experience, that's where I'm thinking maybe it either means that you can't lead with the research report if you don't come from the industry and you come at it from a problem solving entrepreneur who's simply taking advantage of an opportunity or sees an
Yeah.
arbitrage in the market or whatever. Or I guess the other way is if you do that research report, it's going to look quite a bit different, where I guess it's going to focus much more on maybe problem awareness, education, and you come at it from a different angle. Hey, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. So not every company will be comfortable doing something like this, right? So it doesn't have to be a research report though, because that's I fully admit that's a heavy lift for most companies. Like it's if you don't have a quantitative person in house that can split a spreadsheet up into 1,000 different ways for running all of these crazy significance tests, it's probably going to be heavy lifting for a small-ish B2B startup, right? But the point being, doesn't have to be a report, can be an ebook, can be a something that just says what you do, and again, going back to that bridge position, right? Like gives your prospects kind of how you view the market, how you see so and so company fitting into that, and kind of where you see the market going. And you want to really indirectly position your company as the bridge between those two spots. It doesn't have to be a report, can be an ebook, can be a blog article, doesn't really matter. You need something that you can send prospects to read and consume. Because I really think the days of, I mean, how many LinkedIn requests do you get a day where you've just met this person, right?
Yeah.
And the first thing they say is, "Hey, so glad to connect with you. I'm so and so at so and so company, and we do this. Love to take a meeting." How many times does that work for you?
Yeah. Yeah. I accept more people now that don't leave a note when they do the connection request
Yep.
than those that leave a note. And I know the note specifically tells me that they immediately want to jump on a sales call. It's like
Yeah.
I'd prefer to trust my luck with the person that didn't take the time to write the note than the one that I know is on here just to
Yep.
get that meeting. It's like, let's at least chat for a while. I'm a bit more of a shy one than that. You got
You gotta
to
buy me dinner first.
yeah, you got to wine and dine me first. You got to talk nice.
Yeah. So I guess that's my point, right? Is like, if you're a new startup and you're trying to outbound and you're trying to figure out how to outbound, don't lead with product. Don't do that.
Yeah.
Set up a really interesting cadence for them that tackles something they're struggling with. So in the marketplace, it's a well-known issue across the industry. These people are struggling with this. Say, hey, you know what? This might be you. This might not be you, but this is what I think we're really good at. This is kind of why I think you should read it. And it's an article about tackling churn or reducing, detractors in your feedback by
Yep.
integrating it in product. I mean, there's a lot of different things you can do, but point being is like give them something of value first, second, third, fourth time you interact with them. Um, you can't lead with just asking for a meeting. That will never work. Maybe it works every now and then, but I just think the percentage on that is so low.
Totally agree. I told you we weren't going to take the full hour and a half, and like there's so many awesome things to talk about here. I'm like looking, I'm like, shit, there's 11 minutes and we got to crush. So a couple more topics that I do
Yeah,
want
man.
to touch with you
Let's
is
go.
I want to know, I guess, you know, just in brief, ebooks and lead magnets, are you for and against them? Because there's a lot of people right now that are saying like, don't gate your content with an email. You know, a lot of ebooks are feeling like just regurgitated stuff where you just pulled articles from the internet all into one. Like, what are your thoughts? Are they good? Are they bad? How do you do a lead magnet right?
Yep. So what we did, and that's kind of what I'll speak to. I think in general you need lead magnets. So this whole rebellion against like, oh, don't do them. They're a waste of time. I think that's bullshit. I'll flat out say that. I think that's complete horseshit. I think people need to consume content to figure out whether or not your product is a fit. So whether or not that's an
Yeah.
ebook, a blog, they're going to get the content from somewhere. So you need to provide that to them at every stage of the journey. So awareness, consideration, decision. You have to have content that drags them from awareness to consideration to decision. So you need to build out that content journey for your prospects. Um, Now, I will say, I am against low quality ebooks. So again, going back to the like just clickbait title, that is a complete waste of time. Don't do those because people will remember the feeling you give them by like I filled out this form or chat, whatever it may be, and I looked at it for 10 minutes and it was a complete general piece of crap and it wasted my time. They remember that. So you have to think about every interaction with your prospects or customers as being precious. Like you need to deliver on what you promise, over deliver if you can, but always lead with quality. So again, back to one of your original points is like we're up against my company currently, two pretty big competitors, one of them in the $1 billion range. So I have a couple levers to pull, and one of them is quality and brand, right? So my brand needs to look like it's hanging with the bigger guys, and quality always needs to be super high. We're the educators, we're the sages of the market. So our quality, we need to bring it every single time. You do not want to waste people's time. So I think that's really important.
Love it. It seems
Yeah.
like there's a bunch of different ways to leverage the credibility of partners and third parties and actually of competitors to use
Yeah.
that type of C word. Um, and it seems like, you can like what you did. I would understand chronologically, you probably completed your research. And then after you got in the results, that's when you would do the case study or narrow in on a specific part of the research report of somebody that's bigger than you. So maybe you went and you said, hey, bigger company, you said something really cool in one of your reports. we want to double down on that and add that into our report. Maybe you let them know that this is something you want to do in advance to build that relationship. And then after you actually had all your research, then that's actually when you blended it all together and you created your final report for the public. Was that how you did it?
Thank you so much for bringing this up, because I actually think that going back to the original premise of this podcast is like, what do you do if you're a B2B startup and you don't have a ton of money and you're trying to get traction? And again, my thing was like focus, right? Focus on a couple channels, but one of the channels should be co-branding. And that's a weird thing because it's not really a channel, but I consider it a channel. You need to co-brand with companies bigger than you because you tap into their audience, you tap into their content calendar, you gain a little bit of audience from them, and the more you do it, the more and more audience you'll win over from those people to you. So we attached our names at every chance we got to larger names like Microsoft, Salesforce, Vodafone, Firm, Colliers. We did a ton of co-branding, and that report we had 5 companies in there. And exactly what you said, we structured the report, we pretty much wrote it out, and then said, Salesforce, you would be perfect for this report because I read this thing about your company doing this about their experience program, and I think it fits perfectly in this one spot. And by the way, I already got Microsoft, I already got Vodafone, I already got Colliers involved. They're not. So you kind of have to maybe put it out there. You got to get it started. The first one's the toughest. Once you get the first one, it really spills.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there's precedence for this from a bunch of other marketers that I can show you some really funny examples. But
Yeah, I'm talking to so and so, and therefore my
Yeah.
credibility's here. And if
Exactly.
you'll do this, then I'll actually be able to tell the other ones that you exist too. And
Yep.
you're actually, it's all permission based, right? You're giving them permission. And this is a valuable spot where they can get their message to a larger audience. It's really a win-win that you're building, but perhaps you win even more as the startup.
Yep. You do 100%. So, because they don't really care. These companies, especially the larger ones, they don't really care about the lead flow. They get plenty of leads. So what they care about is the press. So again, I'm in a kind of a unique industry where experience programs, Salesforce, Microsoft, these guys get to honestly brag about how great their programs are and how they treat their customers. So you got to find like that angle where it makes sense for them from a press standpoint to get involved.
Yeah. From what
That's the tough
perspective?
part.
From what perspective can you talk about these bigger companies like Microsoft without permission versus for permission? Like if you're just putting together a LinkedIn post and you want to cite something from a Microsoft case study, do you feel completely fine and comfortable to do that? Versus if you're actually going to publish it in an ebook, perhaps you should actually get their approval first. Where would you draw that line?
Great question. So this is where you need to be very careful, especially with the larger companies. You'll find that they have a pretty long lead time on approval and legal and things like that. So it's a really good point to bring up, Luke. You need to get their permission in writing to use that content in your book. And in that writing, you need to kind of say, this also gives us the ability to promote said book and promote their section within said book. That's important because these companies are big and they protect their brand names. And they're also, once they're publicly traded stocks, it becomes a very different game because then you can move markets. So you
Yeah.
legally have to be very careful about what you say, what you advertise. So generally what we did is we got obviously written permission to use their name and likeness. They got the final sign off on anything they had on their name on. So we would show them the final report with their section integrated into the report. They would say yes or no. Once we got the yes in writing, we're good to go. And then we would remind them that by agreeing to this, we also have agreement to promote. And we would give them the collateral to promote on their social channels, and we would provide the collateral for us, obviously, to promote on our channels. But good question. Larger companies have to be a little bit more careful, but either way, it's nice manners to kind of give them a heads up and say, hey, this is what we did with your section. This is what it looks like.
Yeah. Is it different if you're just putting together a LinkedIn post?
I think so. Once the piece is published and you have all of the signatures to promote, my stance is on it is as long as it's not something radical that wasn't in the book, you're good to promote it.
Yeah,
or
even
go this
without
way.
permission, probably from a social media perspective, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because it's your
Totally.
content at that point.
Yeah, I would agree. Um,
Yep.
with briefly stating, I just want to know what your thought is about case studies,
Yeah.
because I want to ask this from the perspective that you've gone on record to say all you need to do is to all you need to sell your product or service is, a brief description of who you're helping and how you're helping them, and then a billion testimonials, right?
Yep.
Where do you think a case study falls into that? I personally think that case studies are not being done very well right now,
They're not.
but I don't necessarily have the formula for how to make them better. Anything top of mind there?
Yeah, definitely. So we're actually in the middle of a homepage rework at my current company where we're putting social proof front and center. So that means our customers, their stories, all of that stuff. It's going to be heavy, heavy, heavy on that. So I think it's valuable. And I saw an article, I think it was HBR, where it basically said most older buyers, and these are my parents' generation that are still working, they buy based off of like research and industry reports and analyst reports. And the
Yeah,
younger generation, they buy almost solely off of reviews and like
I saw
general
that.
yeah. So I think the tide is turning for sure. So I think social proof will be more and more important as the generational of buyers shifts outward. So my parents' generations retire, and then my generation and generations before that start to become the buyers of this software. I think reviews will be more and more important. But in general, man, I think I agree with you. Case studies aren't really done properly. I think I hate to use these guys as an example, but they're always used as an example of good marketing. But Drift does a pretty good job,
Yeah.
where they literally say, "What's the one thing they got out of it?" And it's about the customer, and it's short. It's a video sometimes, but it's like a couple paragraphs. It's not the 5-page book that's marketing. I mean, that's
Yeah.
just yeah.
Makes total sense. I'm going to test you here, Ian. 30-second response. We kind of covered this already, but in 30 seconds, what would be your advice to an entrepreneur for how to find the first customer?
Start with your CEO. And this is again maybe a crappy answer, but your CEO or the founder knows the product better than anybody else and will be able to speak about it at a deeper level. That will be your conduit to your first customer. Once you get to your second customer and your third customer, I would say you need to focus on a couple channels, specifically most likely inbound, so organic search, outbound, and then I would almost say the co-branding piece or like a press. So like pitch press on something cool you've done and try to get press, because that is a growth hack that I think would go a long way for a very young B2B startup. And that's worked very well for companies in the past too.
I love that. That's so actionable, so precise.
Yeah.
Parting words, how do people contact you? How do people stay in touch? If they learned nearly as much as I did on this chat, how do they reach out?
Yeah, of course. Hit me up on LinkedIn. My name's Ian, Luck, Luck. And then, yeah, there you go. Popped it up. All right, man. And obviously, my company I work for is CustomerGauge. You can go to customergauge.com. Check us out there. And then my side passion project is marketing, obviously. So I have a site, marketingstrategy.com. And that's a fun one to check out if you're a marketer.
I'll have links to all those included. Ian, really appreciated having this chat. You said great question to me an exuberant number of times, so I consider you my hype man going forward.
Yeah.
Despite the fact I'm a little bit embarrassed that I thought I had a lot of blue light going on here, you got a bit more than me, buddy.
Yeah, I know. Seriously, right? I feel like I'm going to get an invite from the Blue Man Group.
Should I do outbound? Should I do inbound? You actually have to do both. That's a great conversation I had with Ian Luck. Privileged to have had it to connect the dots between marketing strategy and how it applies to early stage startups. We are the First Customer Club. You already know that, where we are helping startup founders figure out how to find their first customer, build their first product, and get startup traction. I'm trying to build a framework, really, of how the heck to start a startup. So please follow along for all future episodes and historic episodes at www.firstcustomerclub.com. Follow the conversation on LinkedIn by following me directly. That is Luke Bahaneke, and we'll see you in another episode. Thanks, guys.